I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Deborah standing on my front lawn with her arms crossed, staring up at my roof like I had just mounted a nuclear warhead up there. It was a Saturday morning in late April, and I had just finished installing my amateur radio antenna on the peak of my house in Scottsdale, Arizona. The installation had taken me 3 hours, and I was proud of the work. The antenna was a sleek vertical model, about 15 feet tall, designed to help me communicate with other ham radio operators across the country. I had been studying for my amateur radio license for 6 months, passed the exam on my first try, and this antenna represented the culmination of a hobby I had dreamed about since I was a kid watching my grandfather talk to people in Japan from his basement in Ohio. Deborah Mitchell was the president of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association, and she had made it her personal mission to ensure that every single home in our development looked like it had been cut from the same beige, soul-crushing mold. She was 53 years old, had the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and wore her HOA presidency like it was a crown bestowed upon her by divine right. "That needs to come down," she said without any greeting, pointing up at my antenna. I was standing in my driveway, still holding the wrench I had used to secure the mounting bracket. "Good morning to you too, Deborah. Do not get smart with me, Marcus." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my antenna from multiple angles. "You did not submit an architectural review application for this monstrosity." "It's an amateur radio antenna," I explained calmly. "I'm a licensed ham radio operator. I have every right to install this." She lowered her phone and gave me the kind of look a teacher gives a student who just said something incredibly stupid. "You have no rights that supersede our community guidelines." Section 12, Paragraph 4 clearly states that no external modifications to the roofline are permitted without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. I had read the HOA guidelines cover to cover before I bought this house 2 years ago. I knew exactly what they said. I also knew something Deborah apparently did not. Federal law protects my right to install this antenna. The FCC has clear regulations about this. "The FCC has nothing to do with our neighborhood," Deborah snapped. "You have 72 hours to remove that thing or you will face fines. $500 per day until compliance is achieved." My stomach dropped. $500 per day would bankrupt me within a month. I worked as a software engineer for a tech company in Phoenix, and while I made decent money, I was not wealthy enough to just throw away thousands of dollars on HOA fines. "Deborah, I really think you should look into the federal regulations before you make threats like that." The Communications Act of 1934, as amended, and FCC ruling PRB 1 specifically addressed this situation. She stepped closer to me, her eyes narrowing. "I have been the president of this HOA for 8 years. I have dealt with people like you before. People who think they are special, who think the rules do not apply to them. You are not special, Marcus. That antenna comes down or you will regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It is a promise," she said. "You are going to lose this fight. I will make absolutely certain of it." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, her sensible beige flats clicking against the concrete. I watched her climb into her white Lexus SUV and drive away, leaving me standing there with a wrench in my hand and a knot of anxiety in my chest. I went inside and immediately started researching. I pulled up the FCC website and found PRB 1, which was a ruling from 1985 that specifically addressed amateur radio antennas and homeowner association restrictions. The ruling made it clear that HOAs could not prohibit amateur radio antennas entirely, though they could impose reasonable restrictions related to safety and aesthetics, as long as those restrictions represented the minimum practicable regulation needed to accomplish the HOA's legitimate purpose. My antenna was safe. It was professionally installed with proper mounting hardware. It was not an eyesore. It was a simple vertical antenna that blended reasonably well with my roof. By any measure, it met the requirements of PRB-1. I called my friend Jason, who was also a ham radio operator and had dealt with his own HOA issues in temp a few years back. He answered on the third ring. "Marcus, how did the installation go?" "The installation went great." The HOA president showing up and threatening me with $500 per day fines went less great. Jason groaned. "Let me guess, she has no idea about PRB-1. She seems to think the FCC has nothing to do with her neighborhood." Classic. Look, you need to document everything. Every conversation, every letter, every threat. If this goes to court, you are going to need a paper trail. Also, respond to her in writing. Send her a certified letter explaining PRB-1 and your rights under federal law. Be polite but firm. You think this is actually going to go to court? If she is anything like the HOA president I dealt with, yeah. These people do not back down easily. They see it as a personal challenge to their authority. I spent the rest of that Saturday drafting a letter to Deborah. I explained that I was a licensed amateur radio operator, provided my FCC call sign, and cited the relevant federal regulations that protected my right to install and maintain my antenna. I explained PRB-1 in detail and offered to meet with the Architectural Review Committee to discuss any reasonable accommodations that might address their concerns without requiring me to remove the antenna entirely. I printed the letter, drove to the post office on Monday morning and sent it via certified mail with return receipt requested. Then I waited. The response came 4 days later, but not in the form I expected. Instead of a letter, I received a formal notice of violation from the HOA. The notice stated that I was in breach of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Community Guidelines, and that I had 7 days to remove the antenna or face fines of $500 per day. There was no mention of my letter, no acknowledgement of federal law. Just a cold, bureaucratic demand for compliance. I called the HOA management company and asked to speak with someone about the notice. I was transferred 3 times before finally reaching a man named Kevin who identified himself as the community manager. "I am calling about the violation notice I received regarding my amateur radio antenna," I said. "Yes, Mr. Turner. The Architectural Review Committee reviewed your installation and determined it to be in violation of community standards." "Did the committee review the letter I sent explaining my rights under FCC regulations?" There was a pause. "I do not have any record of a letter from you. I sent it certified mail to Deborah Mitchell last Monday. She should have received it by Wednesday at the latest, Mrs. Mitchell is the HOA president, not the management company. If you sent correspondence to her personally, I would not necessarily have a record of it. Can you transfer me to her? Mrs. Mitchell prefers to communicate through official channels. If you wish to contest the violation, you will need to submit a written appeal to the Architectural Review Committee within 14 days. And who is on this committee? Mrs. Mitchell serves as the chair. The other members are Mrs. Patricia Hendricks and Mr. Robert Dalton. Great. Deborah was in charge of the committee that would be reviewing my appeal. This was going nowhere fast. Fine. I will submit an appeal, but I want to make it very clear that federal law is on my side here. The HOA cannot simply ignore the FCC. Your concerns will be noted in your appeal, Kevin said in a tone that suggested they would be noted, and then promptly ignored. I hung up and immediately started drafting my appeal. I included copies of PRB-1, excerpts from the Communications Act, and even a few case studies where courts had sided with ham radio operators against overreaching HOAs. I made the appeal as thorough and professional as possible, hoping that at least one person on the committee would actually read it and understand the legal situation. I submitted the appeal via certified mail and email, covering all my bases. Then I waited again. 2 weeks passed. During that time, I used my antenna regularly. I made contacts with operators in California, New Mexico, Colorado, and even one memorable conversation with someone in Alaska. The antenna worked beautifully, and every time I used it, I felt a mix of joy and defiance. This was my hobby, my right, and I was not going to let some power-hungry HOA president take it away from me. The response to my appeal came on a Tuesday afternoon. I opened the envelope with a sense of dread, already knowing what it would say. The appeal had been denied. The committee found that my antenna violated community standards, and that federal regulations did not supersede the HOA's authority to maintain aesthetic consistency throughout the neighborhood. I was ordered to remove the antenna within 7 days or face immediate fines. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. They had not engaged with any of my arguments. They had not addressed PRB 1 or the case law. They had simply reasserted their authority and expected me to comply. I called Jason again. They denied the appeal, I said. Of course they did. Now comes the fun part. You need to get a lawyer. A lawyer. Jason, I cannot afford a prolonged legal battle. You might not have to. A lot of lawyers will take these cases on contingency, especially if the law is clearly on your side. And trust me, the law is on your side. The HOA is violating federal regulations. If this goes to court, they are going to lose and they are going to have to pay your legal fees. You really think so? I know so. I have seen this play out before. These HOAs think they are untouchable, but the moment a federal judge gets involved, they fold like cheap lawn chairs. I spent the next few days researching attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes and FCC regulations. I found a lawyer named Patricia Gomez who had an office in Phoenix and a track record of winning cases against homeowner associations. I called her office and explained my situation to her paralegal, who scheduled a consultation for the following Monday. Patricia Gomez was in her mid-40s, sharply dressed, and had the kind of confidence that made me feel instantly better about my situation. She listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes on a legal pad. You have copies of all the correspondence. She asked when I finished. I pulled out a folder containing everything: the initial threat from Deborah, my letter explaining PRB 1, the violation notice, my appeal, and the denial. Patricia reviewed each document carefully. This is exactly the kind of case I love, she said finally. The HOA is clearly in the wrong. PRB 1 is unambiguous. They cannot prohibit your antenna and they certainly cannot fine you for installing it. So what do? First, we send them a cease and desist letter. We explain very clearly that they are violating federal law and that if they continue to threaten you with fines, we will file a lawsuit. Most HOAs back down at this point because they do not want the legal expense or the publicity. And if they do not back down, then we sue them. We file in federal court, citing violations of the Communications Act and PRB 1. We ask for an injunction preventing them from fining you or forcing you to remove the antenna, and we ask for attorney fees and damages for the harassment you have endured. What are the chances we win? Patricia smiled. Assuming everything you have told me is accurate, I would say our chances are better than 95%. The law is very clear on this issue, and judges do not like it when local organizations try to override federal regulations. What about the cost? I cannot afford to pay you thousands of dollars upfront. I will take this on contingency. If we win, you do not pay me anything out of pocket. The HOA will be ordered to cover my fees. If we lose, which I do not believe will happen, you do not owe me anything. I only get paid if you get paid. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. When can we start? I will draft the cease and desist letter today. It will go out certified mail tomorrow. Let us see how they respond. The cease and desist letter was 3 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple message: stop harassing my client or face federal litigation. Patricia cited every relevant statute, every court case, and made it abundantly clear that the HOA was on the wrong side of the law. Deborah's response came faster than I expected. 2 days after she received the letter, I got a call from Kevin at the management company. Mr. Turner, I am calling to inform you that the HOA board has scheduled a special meeting to discuss your situation. The meeting will be held this Thursday at 7 p.m. at the community center. Your attendance is requested. Requested or required? Requested, Kevin said carefully, but it would be in your best interest to attend. I called Patricia and told her about the meeting. She said she would come with me. Thursday evening arrived, and Patricia and I walked into the Saguaro Heights Community Center together. The room was set up with a long table at the front where Deborah and the other board members sat, and several rows of chairs facing them. About a dozen residents were scattered throughout the chairs, clearly there to watch the drama unfold. Deborah's expression when she saw Patricia was priceless. Her confident smirk faltered for just a moment before she composed herself. "Mr. Turner, thank you for coming," Deborah said in a syrupy sweet tone that did not match the venom in her eyes. "And you brought a guest." "This is my attorney, Patricia Gomez," I said. Patricia smiled and set her briefcase on the table. "I am here to ensure that Mr. Turner's rights are protected and that this board understands the legal implications of its actions." Deborah exchanged glances with Patricia Hendricks and Robert Dalton, the other committee members. Patricia Hendricks was a thin woman in her 60s who always looked like she had just smelled something unpleasant. Robert Dalton was a retired accountant who generally went along with whatever Deborah wanted. "We called this meeting to discuss a resolution," Deborah said. "We understand that Mr. Turner believes he has certain rights under federal law. However, we also have a responsibility to maintain the character and property values of this community." Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Let me be very clear about something. Mr. Turner does not believe he has rights under federal law. He objectively, unequivocally has those rights. The FCC's PRB 1 ruling, which has been upheld in numerous federal courts, explicitly protects the rights of amateur radio operators to install and maintain antennas. Your HOA guidelines, while they may govern many aspects of this community, cannot override federal law." "We are not trying to override anything," Deborah said defensively. "We simply believe that there are reasonable alternatives that would be less visually intrusive." "Such as?" Patricia asked. "A smaller antenna, or perhaps an indoor antenna. Mr. Turner is operating within a frequency range that requires an outdoor antenna of a certain minimum size to be effective. Asking him to use an indoor antenna or a smaller outdoor antenna would be tantamount to prohibiting him from engaging in amateur radio altogether, which is exactly what PRB 1 forbids." Robert Dalton cleared his throat. "What if we required the antenna to be painted to match the house?" "Would that be acceptable?" I glanced at Patricia, who gave me a small nod. "I would be willing to paint the antenna to match my roof color," I said. "That seems like a reasonable accommodation." Deborah's jaw tightened. She clearly did not like where this was going. "I do not think paint is going to solve the fundamental problem. The antenna is an eyesore, period. Your personal opinion about the aesthetics is not relevant," Patricia said coolly. "What matters is whether the antenna is safe and whether it serves its intended purpose. Mr. Turner's antenna meets both criteria. If you continue to threaten him with fines or attempt to force him to remove the antenna, we will file a lawsuit in federal court, and I can promise you that the HOA will lose. Not only will you be ordered to allow the antenna, but you will also be responsible for paying Mr. Turner's legal fees, which will be substantial." The room fell silent. I could see some of the residents whispering to each other. A few were nodding in agreement with Patricia. Patricia Hendricks spoke up, her voice thin and reedy. "Are you threatening us?" "No," Patricia said. "I am informing you of the consequences of your actions. Threats are what your president made when she told my client he would regret exercising his federally protected rights." Deborah's face flushed red. "I never threatened anyone. You told Mr. Turner, and I quote, 'You are going to lose this fight. I will make absolutely certain of it.' That is a threat, Mrs. Mitchell." "I was simply explaining the HOA's position." You are attempting to intimidate a homeowner into surrendering his legal rights. That is not only inappropriate, it is potentially actionable." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Deborah looked like she wanted to leap across the table and strangle Patricia. Robert Dalton looked deeply uncomfortable. Patricia Hendricks just looked confused. Finally, Robert spoke up. "Perhaps we should table this discussion and consult with the HOA's attorney before proceeding further." "That would be wise," Patricia said. "In the meantime, I expect that no fines will be assessed against Mr. Turner and no further threats or harassment will occur. If they do, we will file our lawsuit immediately." Deborah did not say anything. She just sat there fuming as the meeting dissolved into awkward silence. Eventually, people started to leave. A few residents stopped by to shake my hand and tell me they supported my right to have the antenna. One older gentleman, who I later learned was also a ham radio operator, gave me his call sign and said he would be listening for me on the air. As Patricia and I walked to our cars, she said, "That went better than I expected. I think they are scared." Deborah did not look scared, she looked furious. Fury and fear often go hand in hand. She knows she is in over her head, but her ego will not let her admit it. That makes her dangerous. Dangerous how? She might try to come at you sideways. Harass you about other violations, real or imagined. Make your life difficult in ways that are harder to prove. Just keep documenting everything. If she so much as looks at you wrong, I want to know about it. Over the next few weeks, I waited for the other shoe to drop. Deborah did not contact me directly, but I noticed that I started receiving violation notices about the most ridiculous things. My trash cans were supposedly visible from the street, even though they were in the same place they had been for 2 years. My front lawn had a bare patch that violated landscaping standards, even though the bare patch had been there when I bought the house, and no one had ever mentioned it before. My mailbox was slightly faded and needed to be repainted. I documented every single violation notice and forwarded them to Patricia. She sent a letter to the HOA's attorney, pointing out the obvious pattern of harassment and warning that this behavior would be used as evidence of retaliation if we proceeded to litigation. The violation notices stopped after that. But the silence was almost worse than the harassment. I kept waiting for Deborah to make her next move. It came in early June, almost 2 months after the community center meeting. I received a letter from a law firm in Phoenix, informing me that the Seguero Heights Homeowners Association was filing a lawsuit against me in Arizona Superior Court for violating community guidelines and causing harm to property values throughout the neighborhood. I called Patricia immediately. "They actually did it," I said. "They are suing me." "Let me see the complaint." I scanned the document and emailed it to her. She called me back 20 minutes later. "This is one of the stupidest legal documents I have ever read," she said. "They are suing you in state court for violating HOA guidelines, but they have not addressed federal preemption at all. Their attorney either does not know what he is doing, or Deborah forced him to file this against his advice. So what do? We remove the case to federal court, which is where it should have been filed in the first place if they wanted any chance of winning. And then we file a countersuit for harassment, violation of federal law, and attorney fees. We are going to bury them, Marcus." Patricia was true to her word. Within a week, she had filed the necessary paperwork to move the case to federal court. She also filed a counterclaim that laid out in painstaking detail every action the HOA had taken against me, from Deborah's initial threat to the pattern of harassment via frivolous violation notices. The counterclaim asked for an injunction protecting my antenna, a declaration that the HOA's actions violated federal law, compensatory damages for emotional distress, and full reimbursement of attorney fees. The HOA's response was delayed, then delayed again. Patricia explained that they were probably scrambling to find an attorney who actually understood FCC regulations and federal preemption, because their original lawyer clearly did not. Finally, 2 months later, We received a motion from the HOA asking the judge to dismiss their own lawsuit. They are trying to cut their losses, Patricia explained over the phone. They realize they cannot win, so they want to drop the case and pretend this never happened. Can they do that? They can drop their claim against you, but our counterclaim is still active. We are not letting them off the hook that easily. The case moved forward. Discovery was a tedious process involving interrogatories, depositions, and endless document requests. Patricia deposed Deborah, Patricia Hendricks, and Robert Dalton. She also deposed Kevin from the management company. I was not present for Deborah's deposition, but Patricia told me it was spectacular in the worst possible way. Deborah had been combative, evasive, and at one point had actually yelled at Patricia's paralegal. She had also admitted, under oath, that she had told me I would lose this fight and that she had intended to make my life difficult until I removed the antenna. She basically handed us the case, Patricia said. Her own testimony proves that she engaged in targeted harassment because you exercised your federally protected rights. In October, 7 months after Deborah had first threatened me, we went to trial. The federal courthouse in Phoenix was an imposing building, and I felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as Patricia. And I walked through security and made our way to the courtroom. Judge Harold Brennan was a no-nonsense man in his early 60s who had a reputation for being fair but tough. He listened to opening statements from both sides with an expression that gave nothing away. The HOA's attorney, a man named Richard Carlson, who had clearly been brought in to replace their original lawyer, tried his best to argue that the HOA had a legitimate interest in maintaining property values and aesthetic consistency. He claimed that my antenna was an unnecessary eyesore that could have been avoided if I had simply chosen a less intrusive hobby. Patricia dismantled his argument piece by piece. She presented PRB1 and walked the judge through the FCC's reasoning. She showed photographs of my antenna and demonstrated that it was neither particularly large nor particularly ugly. She presented testimony from other amateur radio operators explaining why outdoor antennas were necessary for effective communication. And she played excerpts from Deborah's deposition, including the part where Deborah admitted to targeting me because she did not like being challenged. The trial lasted 3 days. On the afternoon of the third day, Judge Brennan delivered his ruling from the bench. "I have reviewed the evidence and the applicable law," he began, "and I find that this case is remarkably straightforward. Federal law, specifically the Communications Act of 1934 and FCC ruling PRB1, clearly protects the rights of amateur radio operators to install and maintain antennas. While homeowner associations may impose reasonable restrictions related to safety and aesthetics, those restrictions must represent the minimum practicable regulation necessary to accomplish a legitimate purpose." He paused and looked directly at the HOA's attorney. The restrictions imposed by the Saguaro Heights HOA in this case were neither reasonable nor minimal. The evidence shows that the HOA president, Mrs. Deborah Mitchell, engaged in a campaign of harassment and intimidation designed to force Mr. Turner to remove his antenna, not because it posed any legitimate threat to safety or property values, but because she personally disapproved of it. Deborah, who was sitting in the gallery behind her attorney, looked like she had been slapped. Judge Brennan continued, "I am issuing a permanent injunction prohibiting the Saguaro Heights HOA from interfering with Mr. Turner's antenna in any way. The HOA is further prohibited from imposing any fines, penalties, or restrictions on Mr. Turner related to his amateur radio activities, except to the extent that such restrictions are necessary to ensure physical safety and are applied in a content-neutral manner." He turned to Patricia. "As for damages, I find that Mr. Turner is entitled to compensatory damages in the amount of $15,000 for the emotional distress and inconvenience caused by the HOA's actions. Additionally, The HOA is ordered to reimburse Mr. Turner for all attorney fees and costs associated with this litigation. Miss Gomez, please submit a fee petition within 30 days. Patricia nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Brennan looked back at the HOA's table. I want to be very clear about something. Homeowner associations serve an important function in maintaining community standards, but they are not above the law. When an HOA ignores federal regulations and engages in targeted harassment of a homeowner, there are consequences. I hope this case serves as a reminder to other HOAs that they must operate within the bounds of the law, even when they find those bounds inconvenient. He banged his gavel. We are adjourned. I sat there for a moment, stunned. We had won, not just won, but won decisively. Patricia was beaming as she packed up her briefcase. Congratulations, she said. You just became one of the few people to ever beat an HOA in federal court. How much do you think the attorney fees will be? Based on the hours I have put into this case, probably around $75,000. Maybe more. The HOA is going to get hit with a bill that will make their insurance company very unhappy. As we left the courtroom, I saw Deborah standing in the hallway with Richard Carlson. She was crying, mascara running down her face. Part of me felt bad for her. But then I remembered her standing on my lawn, pointing at my antenna, promising that I would lose. You promised I would lose, I said as I walked past her. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. I hope you are happy. You have destroyed this HOA. No, I said. You destroyed this HOA. All I did was put up an antenna. Patricia and I walked out of the courthouse into the warm Arizona sunshine. I felt lighter than I had in months. Over the next few weeks, the aftermath of the trial rippled through the Saguaro Heights community. Patricia submitted her fee petition, which totaled $82,000. The HOA fought it, of course, but Judge Brennan approved the full amount. Combined with the $15,000 in damages, the HOA was on the hook for nearly $100,000. The HOA's insurance company did cover most of it, but there was a substantial deductible that came out of the HOA's reserves. That meant a special assessment was levied on every homeowner in the community. Each household had to pay an extra $500 to cover the shortfall. The backlash against Deborah was swift and brutal. Angry homeowners showed up to the next board meeting demanding her resignation. She tried to defend herself, claiming that she had been protecting property values, but no one was buying it. She had cost every homeowner in the community $500 because of her personal vendetta against me. She resigned 2 weeks later. Patricia Hendricks and Robert Dalton resigned shortly after. A new board was elected, composed of people who seemed to understand that their role was to serve the community, not to act as petty tyrants. The new board president, a woman named Linda Chen who worked as an engineer for a solar panel company, reached out to me personally. She apologized for the way I had been treated and asked if there was anything the HOA could do to make things right. Honestly, just leave me alone, I said. I do not want any trouble. I just want to enjoy my hobby in peace. You have my word, Linda said. No one is going to bother you about that antenna ever again, and if you ever want to serve on the Architectural Review Committee, we would be happy to have someone with your perspective. I thanked her but declined. I had spent enough time dealing with HOA politics to last me a lifetime. Life slowly returned to normal. I used my antenna regularly, making contacts all over the world. I talked to operators in Brazil, Germany, South Korea, Australia. I participated in emergency communication drills and even helped coordinate relief efforts during a wildfire evacuation in northern Arizona. My antenna, the thing that had caused so much trouble, became a source of pride. I painted it to match my roof, as I had offered to do months earlier, and it blended in nicely. Some neighbors asked me about it, curious about amateur radio. A few even expressed interest in getting their own licenses. One Saturday afternoon in early December, almost 8 months after the trial, I was in my garage working on a new antenna project when someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find Deborah standing there. She looked different, older somehow, tired. Her trademark confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked like resignation. "I know you probably do not want to see me," she said, "but I wanted to apologize." I was so surprised that I did not know what to say. "I was wrong," she continued, "about everything. I let my ego get in the way of common sense. I thought I was protecting the community, but really I was just being controlling. You had every right to put up that antenna, and I should have listened when you tried to explain the law to me." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because I have spent the last 8 months thinking about what happened. I lost my position on the board. My husband is furious with me for costing us $500. Half the neighborhood won't talk to me, and you know what? I deserved all of it. I was a bully. I treated you terribly because you had the audacity to do something I did not approve of." She looked down at her hands. "I do not expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I was wrong and I am sorry." I stood there for a long moment, processing her words. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, but another part of me, a bigger part, felt something like compassion. Deborah had been humiliated, publicly and thoroughly. She had lost everything she cared about because of her own stubbornness. Kicking her while she was down would not accomplish anything. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "It takes courage to admit when you are wrong." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening. "For what it is worth, your antenna does not even look that bad. I was being ridiculous." I almost laughed. "Yeah, you were." She gave me a sad smile. "Anyway, I should go. I just wanted to say my piece." "Deborah," I called as she turned to leave. She looked back. "I hope things get better for you." "Thank you," she said quietly. Then she walked back to her car and drove away. I went back into my garage and picked up the soldering iron I had been using. My hands were shaking slightly. I had not expected that conversation, and it had stirred up emotions I thought I had put behind me. But as I worked on my antenna project, I felt a sense of closure. Deborah had apologized. The case was over. My antenna was secure. Life was good. That evening, I made a contact with an operator in New Zealand. We talked about the weather, our respective hobbies, and the joys of amateur radio. As I signed off and powered down my equipment, I looked at the certificate from the FCC hanging on my wall. Next to it was a framed copy of Judge Brennan's ruling. I had fought for my rights, and I had won. Not just in court, but in a deeper sense. I had stood up to intimidation and harassment. I had refused to back down when someone promised I would lose. And in the end, federal law had protected me, just as it was designed to do. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "On the air tonight." "Just finished a contact with New Zealand," I replied. "Nice, still no trouble from the HOA." "None. New board is great. Old president actually apologized today. No way, that must have felt good." I thought about it for a moment before responding. "Yeah, it did." I put my phone down and walked outside to look at my antenna. It stood tall against the evening sky, silhouetted by the setting sun. It was not just a piece of metal and wire anymore. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for. It represented the idea that even when powerful people promise you will lose, sometimes the law is on your side. Sometimes justice prevails. Sometimes standing up for yourself is worth the trouble. A cool breeze blew across the desert, and I could hear the distant sound of someone playing music at a neighborhood gathering. Life in Sagaro Heights had moved on. The drama was over. The community had learned a valuable lesson about the limits of HOA authority. And me? I had my antenna, my hobby, and the satisfaction of knowing that I had stood my ground and won. I walked back inside, sat down at my radio station, and tuned to a new frequency. Somewhere out there, another ham radio operator was calling for a contact. I picked up my microphone and responded, my voice traveling through the air, bounced off the atmosphere, reaching across continents and oceans. This was why I had fought so hard. This connection. This community. This freedom to communicate with the world. and no HOA, no matter how determined, could take that away from me. The months that followed brought an unexpected development. The case attracted attention from the amateur radio community nationwide. Ham radio magazines and websites ran articles about my victory, and I received dozens of emails from operators who were dealing with their own HOA issues. Patricia Gomez became something of a celebrity in the amateur radio legal world, and she told me that several other operators had reached out to her for representation. In February, almost a year after Deborah first threatened me, I was invited to speak at the annual Arizona Amateur Radio Association convention in Tucson. I drove down on a Friday morning, nervous about speaking in front of a crowd. But when I arrived at the convention center and saw the hundreds of operators setting up equipment, demonstrating new technologies and sharing stories, I felt at home. My presentation was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. I talked about my experience with the HOA, the legal battle, and the importance of knowing your rights under federal law. I explained PRB1 in detail and gave practical advice for dealing with HOAs. Document everything, respond in writing, know the law, and do not be afraid to get legal help if necessary. The room was packed. After my presentation, I spent 2 hours answering questions and talking with operators who wanted to share their own stories. Some had successfully defended their antennas. Others were in the middle of disputes with their HOAs. A few were considering getting into amateur radio but were hesitant because of HOA restrictions. To each of them, I gave the same advice. Do not let fear of your HOA prevent you from pursuing this hobby. The law is on your side. You have rights. Exercise them. An older man approached me as the crowd was thinning out. He introduced himself as Walter Simmons, and he said he had been fighting with his HOA in Mesa for 3 years over a small antenna he wanted to install. They keep rejecting my applications, he said. They claim the antenna is too tall, even though it is only 10 feet. I have tried explaining PRB1, but they do not care. I am about ready to give up. Do not give up, I said. Contact Patricia Gomez. I will give you her information. She can send them a letter that will make them reconsider their position very quickly. Walter's eyes lit up. You really think she would help me? I know she would. This is exactly the kind of case she loves. I gave Walter Patricia's business card and he thanked me profusely. As I watched him walk away, I felt a sense of purpose. My battle with the HOA had been exhausting and stressful, but it had also opened doors. It had given me a platform to help others. It had turned a personal struggle into something meaningful. That night, I sat in my hotel room and scrolled through emails on my laptop. There was one from Patricia, forwarding me an article from an HOA industry magazine. The article was titled "Learning from Legal Losses: How HOAs Can Avoid Costly Litigation Over Antennas." The article used my case as a cautionary tale. It explained PRB1, discussed the legal risks of ignoring federal law, and advised HOAs to work cooperatively with amateur radio operators rather than fighting them. The article even quoted Judge Brennan's ruling. I called Patricia. Did you see the article? She asked. Yeah, it is weird seeing my case used as an example. It is a good thing. This is going to help a lot of operators. HOAs are going to think twice before they try to pull what Deborah did. Have you heard from Walter Simmons yet? I gave him your card today. He emailed me this evening. I will send a letter to his HOA on Monday. I am betting they back down within a week. You are doing good work, Patricia. So are you. That presentation you gave today is going to inspire people. You stood up for your rights, and now others are going to do the same. After we hung up, I sat there thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. It had started with a simple desire to install an antenna and pursue a hobby I loved. It had turned into a legal battle that consumed months of my life and cost the HOA nearly $100,000. But in the end, it had been worth it, not just for me, but for every amateur radio operator who would benefit from the precedent that had been set. For every homeowner who would stand up to an overreaching HOA because they knew the law was on their side. For every Walter Simmons who refused to give up on their dreams because someone told them they could not do something. I returned to Scottsdale on Sunday evening. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked up at my antenna standing proudly on my roof. The sun was setting behind it, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. I thought about Deborah's apology, about Judge Brennan's ruling, about Patricia's fierce advocacy, about Walter's gratitude, about all the emails from operators thanking me for sharing my story. And I thought about that first day when Deborah stood on my lawn and promised I would lose. She had been wrong. And in being wrong, she had helped prove something important, that individuals have power, that laws matter, that standing up for yourself can make a difference. I grabbed my bags from the car and walked inside. My radio station was right where I had left it, ready for my next contact. I powered on the equipment and listened to the familiar static and chatter of the airwaves. Someone was calling from Montana, looking for a contact. I picked up my microphone. "This is November 7 Mike Tango Romeo, reading you loud and clear. Go ahead." And just like that, I was connected to Montana, to the amateur radio community, to a hobby that had taught me more about perseverance and courage than I ever expected. The antenna that had caused so much trouble had become something more than a tool for communication. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest fights are the ones most worth fighting. That sometimes people will promise you will lose, but if you stand firm and trust in the law, justice can prevail. I talked to the operator in Montana for 20 minutes, discussing weather patterns and propagation conditions. When we signed off, I sat back in my chair and smiled. My antenna was secure. My rights were protected. And somewhere out there, another amateur radio operator was learning about my case and finding the courage to stand up to their own HOA. Deborah had promised I would lose. But in the end, everyone won. The law was clarified. HOAs learned their limits. Operators learned their rights. And I learned that sometimes the best response to intimidation is simply to stand your ground and let the truth speak for itself. As the evening deepened and the desert cooled, I made a few more contacts: California, Oregon, Canada. Each conversation was a small victory, a celebration of the freedom to communicate that I had fought so hard to protect. And when I finally powered down my equipment and went to bed that night, I slept soundly, knowing that my antenna would still be there in the morning, standing tall, connecting me to the world, a testament to the power of persistence and the protection of federal law. The story could have ended there, but life has a way of adding unexpected chapters. In March, more than a year after Deborah's initial threat, I received a letter from the Arizona Attorney General's office. The letter explained that they were investigating the Saguaro Heights HOA for potential violations of consumer protection laws and requested my cooperation. I called the number listed in the letter and spoke with an investigator named Sarah Michaels. She explained that my case had caught the attention of the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, and they were looking into whether the HOA had engaged in a pattern of abusive practices beyond just my situation. "We have received complaints from several other homeowners in your community," Sarah said. "Allegations of arbitrary fines, selective enforcement of rules, and what appears to be targeted harassment of residents who challenge the board's authority. Your case is the most well-documented, which is why we are starting there. What do you need from me? All the documentation you have. Every letter, every email, every violation notice. We are building a case to demonstrate that the HOA under Mrs. Mitchell's leadership operated in a manner that violated Arizona's consumer protection statutes." I spent that evening compiling everything I had. The folder had grown thick over the past year. I made copies of all the documents and mailed them to the Attorney General's office the next day. 3 months later, the Attorney General announced a settlement with the Saguaro Heights HOA. The HOA agreed to implement new governance procedures. including mandatory training for board members on fair housing laws and federal preemption, a formal appeals process for violation notices, and oversight by an independent community management company. The HOA also agreed to pay a $25,000 penalty to the state. The announcement made local news. A reporter from the Arizona Republic called me for a comment. "I am glad to see that something positive came out of this situation," I told her. "No one should have to go through what I went through just to exercise their legal rights. Hopefully, these reforms will prevent future abuses." The article ran the following Sunday, complete with a photo of my antenna and a detailed account of the legal battle. The headline read, "HOA reforms follow federal court loss over ham radio antenna." Linda Chen, the current HOA president, called me after the article was published. "I want you to know that the current board fully supports these reforms," she said. "We are not the same organization that sued you. We are committed to operating fairly and within the law." "I believe you," I said, "and I appreciate you reaching out. There is one more thing. The board would like to formally apologize to you at our next community meeting. We want the entire neighborhood to know that what happened to you was wrong and that it will never happen again." I thought about it for a moment. That is not necessary. Maybe not necessary, but it is the right thing to do. Please, let us do this. I attended the community meeting the following Thursday. The community center was packed with residents, many of whom I had never met. Linda stood at the front of the room and called the meeting to order. "Before we begin our regular agenda, the board has an important statement to make," she said. She looked at me. "Marcus, would you please stand?" I stood, feeling self-conscious as dozens of eyes turned toward me. Linda continued. "A little over a year ago, our previous board, under the leadership of Deborah Mitchell, engaged in conduct that was not only legally wrong but morally wrong. They harassed a member of our community, Marcus Turner, for exercising his federally protected right to install an amateur radio antenna. They threatened him with exorbitant fines. They sued him in court, and they cost this community nearly $100,000 in legal fees and damages." The room was silent. "On behalf of the current board and on behalf of this community, I want to apologize to Marcus. You were treated shamefully. You did nothing wrong. And the fact that you had to endure months of stress and legal battles just to pursue your hobby is a stain on this HOA's history." She paused, then said, "But your fight was not in vain. Because of your courage and persistence, our HOA has changed. We have new leadership, new procedures, and a new commitment to fairness. We have learned that homeowner associations exist to serve their communities, not to rule over them. So thank you, Marcus. Thank you for standing up for yourself and in doing so, standing up for all of us." The room erupted in applause. I stood there overwhelmed as my neighbors clapped and a few people even stood up. I saw Walter Simmons in the back row, grinning and giving me a thumbs up. Patricia Gomez was there too, sitting near the front, her expression one of pride. When the applause finally died down, Linda asked if I wanted to say anything. I walked to the front of the room, my heart pounding. "I am not much of a public speaker," I began, "but I want to say that I did not fight this battle because I wanted to be a hero or make a statement. I fought because I love amateur radio. It is a hobby that has brought me joy, friendship, and a sense of purpose. When someone tried to take that away from me, I felt like I had no choice but to stand up." I looked around the room. "But here is what I learned. Laws only matter if people are willing to enforce them. Rights only exist if people are willing to defend them. The FCC created PRB1 to protect amateur radio operators, but if I had just given up when Deborah threatened me, that protection would have been meaningless. So my message to everyone here is simple. Know your rights. Stand up for yourself. Do not let anyone, even your own HOA, intimidate you into surrendering something that matters to you." I sat back down to more applause. The meeting continued with routine business, but afterward, dozens of people came up to shake my hand and share their own stories. A woman named Janet told me that she had been cited for planting flowers in her front yard that were not on the approved list, and she was inspired by my case to challenge the citation. A man named Carlos said he had been fined for parking his work truck in his driveway, even though there was no rule against it, and he was planning to appeal. It occurred to me that my case had done more than just protect my antenna. It had empowered an entire community to question authority, to demand fairness, and to hold their HOA accountable. As I drove home that night, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The journey that had started with Deborah standing on my lawn, promising I would lose, had come full circle. Not only had I won my personal battle, but I had helped change an entire system. My antenna was secure. My community was better. And the law, the beautiful, powerful, protective federal law, had done exactly what it was supposed to do: protect the rights of an individual against institutional overreach. I parked in my driveway and looked up at my antenna one more time. It stood there, unbothered, resilient, a silent witness to everything that had transpired. Tomorrow, I would make more contacts. I would talk to operators in distant lands. I would participate in emergency drills and mentor new operators who were just getting started in the hobby. But tonight, I would simply appreciate what I had accomplished. I had stood up to a bully. I had fought a legal battle and won. I had helped reform an organization that had lost its way. And I had proven that sometimes, when someone promises you will lose, the best response is to prove them spectacularly wrong. The antenna remained, a symbol of persistence, of justice, of the fundamental American principle that individuals have rights that no association, no matter how powerful, can simply take away. Deborah had promised I would lose. She could not have been more wrong.